Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. You're here for the vibe coding webinar from Softeq. Looks like we have about 20 people online, about 70 signups. So people will start trickling in here a little bit more as we get going. So my name is Chris Howard. I'm the founder and CEO of Softeq. We've been doing this stuff for 3 decades now. I mean, when I started my career, I was storing my programs on this stuff, paper punch tape, holes in paper. That's how old I am, I guess. This program's probably 50 years old, by the way. But even when I started my college career, I was using paper punch cards, Hollerith cards. And my one and only formal programming class was on Fortran, and we were still storing code on holes in paper. So we've come a long way. Um, for those that don't know, Softeq is a full stack developer. We do everything from firmware, hardware, mobile, web backend, AI, ML, and data analytics. And we're doing a lot of AI stuff now, a lot of edge AI. Physical AI is a big thing right now. And I thought it would be fun to have a discussion with my good friend Thorsten, who I've known for, I don't know, 10 plus years, I think, since you were
Yeah,
CTO over at Lenovo.
I was actually just thinking about it when you mentioned that number. I think we've been working together for more than 20 years now.
Oh my goodness, I don't know.
My hair wasn't this great.
Time flies when you're having fun, right?
Absolutely.
So So you're over at Nvidia now. You've been there about 5 years, something like
Yep,
that.
yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Okay. All right. So that's great. So we're going to talk together about vibe coding, what the advantages are, the pitfalls, and why you still need developers. And let's get started a little bit here. What is vibe coding? For those that don't know, actually, it was a phrase coined by Andre Karpathy early last year to describe fully giving in the vibes, just kind of letting AI handle the code while you focus on intent. He's been pretty active over the last year or two, saying he doesn't actually write code much anymore. He's basically informing the AI to try to infer what he wants to get out of it. But he's also a very highly skilled developer. And I saw this post yesterday from Benji Taylor. Apparently, Benji just joined X.com as lead designer. And I thought this was very much on point for our discussion. It's never been easier to build both great and awful software. The tools are easier than ever to do a great job and a terrible job. And then one more comment before we kind of get into Thorsten's experience of mine. But my analogy of vibe coding. So essentially, for a really long time, you've been able to use Google Translate to translate from any language to another language. So if you want to translate from English to German, for example, you can do that. The problem is, if you don't really know German, you don't know what the quality of that output is or what you got. And then she told me the story of her doing that exact thing. She knows German quite well, but she was translating a document to German. And this is what it translated to. She wanted to say, please reach out and contact me at any time. The translation was, feel free to touch me at any time, right? Which was definitely not what her intent was when she wanted that translated. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you prevent that same kind of thing in coding. So let's talk about Thorsten's vibe coding experience. I don't know if that's your setup. Is that about your setup there?
Actually, yeah, it is, and you'll notice that I'm a little bit off. I'm a little bit off camera, and that's because
Yeah.
this is one of my screens, another one, and yeah, during COVID, I pretty much got set up with a full multimedia studio that actually looks very much like that. Not quite the mood lighting though that it has in the back, but
Well, you need to
yeah,
add that. And before you get
yeah.
started, let me interrupt you for one quick second because I forgot to say this. We will have a Q&A session at the end of this webinar. There's a button over on the right where you can ask your questions. You can also ask in chat, like with the question mark, it'll ask you if you want to make that a question. So as you're listening to me or Thorsten and something comes to mind, please go ahead and just enter your question, and then other people can upvote those questions. So if you have a popular question, we'll probably answer them in the order of popularity if anyone has any questions. So sorry about that, Thorsten. Go ahead and get going.
No, absolutely no problem, Chris. All right, so Yeah, I really want to highlight, the experiences, my experiences, and also, some of the best practices that I've picked up from, as myself in working with these things, and also, in working with my colleagues on all sorts of different projects. So I love the examples that you gave, right? I absolutely love the examples that you gave. They pretty much do outline exactly, at a very high level, the types of results that I've seen. But I do want to highlight that vibe coding, depending on what you use, is definitely there, and it's there to really change your productivity. And there was another quote this morning, actually, that I just read, um, which was talking all about how even like blue collar workers should take a look at leveraging AI in their job, right? Somebody that's not typically leveraging AI today, and even in that particular case, there's a whole bunch of opportunity to leverage it. So I typically start, I guess, and it is very very true. It is very much a crap in, crap out. It's very much about the quality. It's about knowing the quality of what you're feeding into it, and also knowing about the quality of what you're getting out of it, right? So if you are doing just simple proof of concepts, then I think that a lot of very simple proof of concepts or UI mockups or something else like that, then I do have to say is I do believe that it's within everyone's reach to be able to leverage it. And in a simple project actually that I just did this Monday, um, um, I also participated in the trusted computing group. And by the way, I wasn't going to use this example, and I also didn't wear this shirt just for that. But trusted computing group defines a TPM, a security chip, and it's actually really really hard to explain what a TPM does. It's in your PCs, it's all over the place. But it's really hard to explain what it does. And I was giving a talk to some crypto, not crypto, sorry, security students at a local university here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I was like, how do I explain how a TPM works? And so my simple prompt, by the way, very, very simple prompt, was leveraging the, the specifications published by TCG here, and I provided the web page, create a standalone HTML page that simulates the behavior of a TPM. Okay.
Mm.
End of story. And by the way, it did it, and it wrote, and it wrote. And by the way, this can be used by anyone in production. Just try it, by the way. I'd just like to point it out.
What is your tool of choice right now? What were you doing? What were you prompting that into?
Anything. I'm not kidding. It was, in my particular case, it was Copilot Plus, right?
Okay.
But you could do this with Gemini. You could do it with ChatGPT. You could do it with anything at that
Complexity,
particular
whatever.
level.
Yeah.
It just does it. And then, by the way, I copied the generated HTML code into a file, saved it as an HTML file, and then I open it up in Edge or Chrome or whatever else like it. And yes, by the way, it actually created, I have to say, is a relatively good simulation of a TPM, right? And I was able to then demonstrate how that works. Now, would I use my simulation as a real TPM? Absolutely not. Absolutely not,
Mm.
right? Because that requires a whole bunch more. And that is actually then getting to the next level, right? So getting to the next level requires a whole bunch more work and is less, I'll call it, about vibe coding. It's a lot about prep. And this is actually probably, Chris, exactly the way that you and I have been working on projects together over the last 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, you know, um, your team and you create great things when I explain what I need properly to you,
Right.
right? Um, and then by the way, I improve on what you've given me by me understanding what I need, and then basically walking through, through the different steps, and then basically providing feedback to your developers in terms of what changes need to be done in order to meet where my specifications weren't good enough, right? And again, that's worked for many years, and I think that's exactly where it is today. So when I do want to point out a couple of major projects that I've worked on quite recently. So I am currently working on a out-of-band management implementation. Think of it as a BMC Lite um, that is integrated into a microprocessor. I'm just trying to play around a little bit in terms of what can happen. And I was looking through it. This thing runs FreeRTOS. Chris, I've never worked with FreeRTOS in my life. Okay, I'm a Linux, I'm a Windows guy. Never FreeRTOS. And so somebody said, "Is wanted to try this out?" And I said, "I don't know if I can." Um, and so I started by just simply looking and researching into it. And then, by the way, just like you would in any project, I started creating. And in my particular case, you don't need to follow the same one, but it works for me. I created a set of markdown documents that now basically explain exactly what I need. And by the way, in my particular case, I needed a TLS 1.3, I needed HTTP, I needed JSON, and then I was experimenting with Redfish, right? Those are that's again, by the way, that's what typically makes up a light BMC, right? And very, very simply, I created a markdown document that basically had a couple of different things. My requirements, right, in terms of what the feature set was that I needed to cover. I created another markdown document that I think I spent a week and a half writing, which is basically also highlighting my security requirements, right? I looked at OWASP, for example, and researched there to see what the best practices were. And I put that into another markdown document. Then I looked at, okay, if I'm going to be interacting with this, is what would be an example of a user experience or a UI, right? And so again, I researched, I said, was looking at it. I created another markdown document. I looked at the Redfish specification, went to DMTF, and I downloaded it. And I looked at the relevant sections in the DMTF Redfish specification and added that. And lastly, by the way, just to stay on that same spot, I also added, for example, the Redfish example code that they have, right? Mm. So you can see, by the way, I didn't just sit down and say, create me a light BMC, because that wouldn't have worked. I made sure that I prepped and got everything done. Now,
and then just to interrupt you for a second, for maybe some more of them non-developers out there, we might have some here that just want to do some of their own vibe coding. But the difference is, for like a lot of users, when you're prompting a ChatGPT or a Perplexity or something, you're typing in a prompt and getting an answer, right? But what you're talking about is creating these markdown files, which are essentially a text or document file, and they're actually like .md is a convention, right? You can have more than one of these files that you then make your LLM available, point them to the directory or whatever to them, that describes all of these features and parts of the solution that you want before you then tell it what you want. And you reference these MD files. They're just text files, right? Mostly they're just like, not, I guess they could be anything. They could be Word docs or whatever, because they can actually ingest them. But for the most part, they're just, what I've seen is almost like old school text editing, like we used to in the old days. But it's not code. It's just descriptions and bullet lists and requirements and kind of like a prompt on steroids, right? Is that kind of what you're doing?
Yeah, it's a product requirement document, right? It's basically what your marketing team and what your product management team is writing up about it. And actually, Jonathan just raised a really, really good point around bloat concerns of too many markdown files. Yes, by the way, that is something that you do need to watch out for. That's why you need to make sure that your information is relevant in the first bit. And again, by the way, to also get to the question that Jonathan raised there in the chat. So there is a second step. So I upload all of that, and there is a critical next step that I go through, which is really, really important. Now, remember, I have skills, just like, and by the way, I'm not saying I have great skills, but I do have skills. I know what I want, and I have technical skills. And Chris, this is your team's strength, right? So what I actually do in the next step is I now say is, using these markdown documents and using all of the requirements that I've got in there, please interview me for any of the missing gaps and any of the missing information that you have in order to be able to come to a technical architecture. And I
That's
also add
interesting. That's interesting because most people don't think like, oh, now you flip the script there and the LLM is prompting you, right?
exactly, and that's
Mm-hmm.
something that's critical. And the one most important add that I add, so I tell it to interview me, and then I also say is do not make up anything. Okay. So that's basically me telling it to really to identify the gaps, not to fill those with assumptions or with hallucinations, but to actually go back and now ask me for any of the things. And by the way,
Do you
I'm
really
not
need to
kidding.
prompt for that, by the way? You need
Yes,
really
you
say,
do.
don't make anything up.
Yeah, you do. An LLM, unfortunately, most LLMs are there. They've been created to please the user, right? Not all of
Mm-hmm.
them, not all of them, but many of them have been, right? And so on some of these things, as I said, they'll hallucinate. So you do need to make sure that you add a prompt like that into the prompt, and then again, tell it to ask you questions so that you fill in the gaps. That's the
Mm-hmm.
thing that's really important. Okay.
Interesting. Yeah, my analogy on that is that a lot of the LLMs are like the mirror in Snow White. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Well, you are. You're the smartest guy I know, and this is a fantastic idea, and this is going to make you $1 million. And that's kind of how they flatter you, right? So this
Now,
LLM
now,
really knows what it's talking about, by the way, Thorsten, because I am a
Now,
genius.
that's right. So, Chris, another little tip. This is also a good tip that I use quite a lot. And so, I for ChatGPT, for Gemini, for Copilot, you can add like custom instructions, right? That you
Mhm.
can add to that personalize it to you, right? So one of the instructions that I've given to ChatGPT, Gemini, and also Copilot is, and this is, I when I type in the word idiot, okay, this is very important. When I type in the word idiot, be a harsh critic of my idea and find at least three faults, three improvements, and two things that you don't think are viable about my idea. Right. So
Mhm.
that's basically it. There's also something that's very
Interesting.
important. So sometimes when I get into that thing is where it's told me I'm the most beautiful guy in the world. Right. I've looked in that mirror and it says,
Mhm.
Thorsten, your idea is fantastic. You're going to, this is this next best thing since sliced bread. I go
Mhm.
in, idiot, please evaluate my idea. And then it comes back and it actually gives me harsh criticism. And then, by the way,
Mhm.
no, it tells me my idea is ugly. And now I can balance the two. And
Yeah.
again, I get both sides of the coin, right? That's something that's also really
Interesting.
important.
Hmm. So you did all those MD files, you've asked it to prompt you back, and then what's the last step then, like when you want to create what it is you're doing then?
um, so that's right. So I create the MD files. I have to ask it to interview me. Now, this is the important part, and this also goes back to Jonathan's question. At some stage, depending on what model you're using, you may run out of memory. And this is something
Mm,
that's really, really critical. Okay. So, depending on the tool that you're using, one of the things that I have is I have it document all of the responses and all of the conclusions and all of the actions that we've taken in another markdown document,
mm,
right? Because a markdown document can be hundreds of pages long and it can then go back and it can refer back to those. But a prompt session, and I don't know if anybody's ever gotten to a prompt session that's that long, at some stage, it forgets what you prompted like
mm,
5 days ago, right?
mm,
It just forgets because it's no longer in its active memory. I mean, so
mm,
that's one of the things that I also do is as I'm going through the answers, I say, at each stage of progress and at each question and answer session, please write the progress of our interview of this session into a progress markdown document so that it can
mm.
always refer back to that and it never loses memory so that it's something that is actually now in written form. That's something that's
You have to
also very
tell it
important.
to you have to tell it to work like Memento, keep writing things down.
That's right. That's right. Eventually, yeah, and it is something that's really good. It's something that's really really good. And then, by the way, all right. So next stage is then in the planning phase. So then, once I've answered all of the questions, I then tell it to go into planning phase. And in the planning phase, a couple of the things that are important is I'll ask it to summarize the conclusions that it's come to, right? So that I can double check whether it's going the right direction. Again, remember, this requires me to understand what I'm doing. That's something that's fairly important. I need to understand what the results are. Um,
Mm-hmm.
this is again where your team comes in, right? In all these different types of projects, Chris. Um, I then process that. I make sure, and then by the way, I'll tell it to come up with both a pen test and fuzzing test plan, and a QA and validation test plan.
Mm.
Um, and again, write those into a markdown document. Okay, very
Okay.
important. Now, at this stage, by the way, I've probably already spent about 2 to 3 weeks gathering all the documentation. I've probably spent about 3 to 4 days on this prompt and working through it. If I'm okay, I've spent about a day. And now it will actually go into the coding phase. Very important. I do have to say is I don't automate the entire coding process. I do ask it to tell me what it's done so that I can validate it so that it's not suddenly deleting files or doing other things. So I do
Mm-hmm.
verify what coding it's actually doing. By the way, I don't have to code the code. I don't need to watch out to make sure I put a semicolon or a comma or whatever. I don't need to mind about syntax anymore, but I'm still checking to make sure that what it's coded actually makes sense, right?
Mm.
And that's something that's important. Now, by the way, Chris, um, I I stopped coding way even before you and I met. Right?
Yeah,
Real
but you
coding.
know the general process.
That's it. That's
Um,
right.
do you iterate then on that? Because what I've seen it also do is like you can ask it to write a function and it writes a 200 line function. And you're like, well, I mean, can you make that function shorter? Can you actually use library routines, to actually, make it more efficient? And then it'll like, oh yeah, sure. And then it gives me a 5 line function. You're like, well, so it's kind of like the old GPSs where they were good at getting you somewhere, but it wasn't the most efficient way to get you there. Like you were going to eventually get there, but you might have been going through the worst part of town and all these other things, right? So, oh, lost lost Thorsten there. At least for me, I don't know if you see that, Damon. The AI cut Thorsten off for a minute. I think
Skynet's involved.
somebody let me back in. He said so. I don't know, Damon. Can you do that? Skynet, yeah. Skynet's listening. It's like he was on to something there. He might have bumped a button. You see him back in the list. Yeah.
Working on it.
All right, no problem. Yeah, so I mean, it'll get you where you're going, but not necessarily the most efficient way that you can go there. Now things have gotten a lot better over the last 10 or 15 years on GPSs. Still, there's still you still have to kind of like I remember when I was first driving GPSs, it would maybe tell me to turn somewhere. It would be the wrong way on a one-way street, right? And so you had to have that level of supervision. So I think that that's where a lot of these AI tools are now. That why you need to have basically an adult in the room unless you're just doing some proof of concepts or rapid prototyping like Thorsten said. So you're either using the vibe coding for a rapid prototype that you're not going to put into production, or developers are using it more as a productivity enhancement. Hey Thorsten.
Yeah, sorry, but
had to take a break. We thought that Skynet might have taken you out there for a minute. It's like yeah.
Yeah. There are, by the way, to get back to that, there are sites now where you can add skills. And skills are like prepackaged. I'll call them prepackaged markdown documents for particular functions. But again, by the way, you need to know which ones you select, right? So that goes
skills,
back.
So what's the difference between like a persona and a skill, right? It used to be like you had to tell that you are a senior software developer with 20 years of Java experience and you're trying to create this mobile app. I mean, skill is different than that.
Yeah, skill is exactly as you said, is how to optimize a particular function, right? How to interact with, how to optimize a particular Python code, how to understand the intricacies of TLS 1.3 as an example, right? Or so many different skills, and there's a whole bunch of new websites that are popping up that you can go to while you're doing this that provide the relevant skills.
Is the skill like an MD file, or is it like a Markdown file, or is it like some other thing that you plug into your prompt?
Both. It's a Markdown dot, and then many of the vibe coding assistants today actually have skills plugins that you can then download.
So if you're using something like Lovable or something like that, you would,
Yep.
you know.
Exactly. Yep. That's exactly it. That's exactly it.
All right. So you were just about to generate your product, your app or your website that you were just coding with all these MD files. You spent about 3 weeks working on the specification and getting things set up and doing all this stuff. And then you're actually going to do the real work, which I guess that's when all the tokens are going to be consumed, right? I saw another quote by Jensen, the CEO of Nvidia recently. He was at the GTC conference last week, and he's like, if I'm paying a developer $500K a year. I wish I had his budget for that, but he's paying a developer $500,000 a year. That sounds crazy. That's California for you. I'm going to be worried if they're not consuming $250,000 a year in tokens. Right? Essentially, he wants every developer to be consuming at least 50% of what he's paying them in tokens, or they're not doing their job. So once you go and generate this, how much did it cost you in tokens to get what you wanted?
So I do want to say is it's not free of charge, right? You are consuming tokens. So for that project that I was talking about, I did obviously reach out. I looked out on the open market and checked to see if there was something like this available, and there were a couple of projects that were available. And I went through the calculations, and basically the calculations were, so if I work with companies that had this kind of stuff already, it would have been about $120,000 to $150,000 in order to get everything put in place, and then buy it in. So on this particular project that I mentioned in the beginning, I spent about $10,000 worth of tokens. Okay. And then, but by the way, at the end of it, with my skills, with the stuff that I fed into it, I did have fully viable, fully fuzzed, fully security pen tested, fully validated code. That I can now, with 98% reliability, basically take into production, right? So that's something that's there. But as I said, again, it took a lot of effort and took a lot of my time. And
3 or 4 weeks of your effort to kind of put it together, since
that's
you
right.
You're doing. So that's interesting. And not everything's that way, but yeah, it's the key is you want to use developers, by the way, that are leveraging AI, just like Jensen was saying. I mean, if you're using a partner that's not embracing AI, then you're not getting full value out of their time.
So I now spend, I guess the thing that's important, I now spend a lot less time debugging what I've created or debugging what others have created, and a lot more time into thinking about the process, the product requirements, the technicalities of it. And so if you know, if your customers know what they want, but they don't have the technical skills to do so, working together, for example, with you or with somebody else that knows what they're doing in this particular case, which again is you, right? They can get to that really easily, because that interaction is then there, and that's something that's really, really valuable.
Interesting. Yeah, because you need to know, like, things like, well, did you? What I see a lot of people running into is that you didn't tell the LLM to even consider security. Right. So it's putting an app out there or a website out there that didn't even think about whether it could be hacked or is following any security rules, because you didn't have a security MD markdown file, etc. So, and so there's a lot to take in. Well, I know we're like about 30 minutes in here, but I wanted to jump maybe to a few of the slides, and we can talk about a little bit more on the vibe coding, and you can chime in with as we go here. So let me bring this back, see if I can move us over. And because I know we could probably talk for another couple hours here if we wanted to. I'd love to have you on my podcast, so maybe we'll do that and go a little bit more into it. All right, just to get to our Q&A, let's cover a couple top-level topics. Some of the key benefits of vibe coding. We talked about the rapid prototyping, right? So a lot easier to transfer your ideas into working code, even if you're not a developer. Thorsten knows a lot of stuff, but he doesn't have to actually code it himself. Plus lower barrier of entry for non-technical stakeholders. But I think that, my personal opinion is, while it has gotten easier to do a lot of these things, it's still highly technical work, right? So I may be a little biased there, but it's still, a lot, even for someone like me to kind of get my head around. Plus faster iteration cycles. For developers, it's a multiplier. That's what we talked about Jensen saying. If you're not consuming those tokens, you're not actually leveraging the tools that are available today. And similarly, for anyone, developers or anyone else in HR, sales, or marketing, etc., it's a learning accelerator, right? And so you can, not just for knowledge, but for coding. Pitfalls. We hit on some of these. I'm not going to cover every single one of them, but there's quality and maintainability issues. You can generate the code, but now you've got technical debt. Maybe you need to maintain it. There's security issues they need to address. There's the looks right trap. Like, it looks like it's working. Maybe you don't even know how to tell whether it looks like it, right? It's in German, but is it good German? And there's, just the fact that it compiled and worked doesn't mean that it's, correct, right? And then for development teams in general, if you're a developer, you can kind of, they've done some studies actually that the reliance on the AI can actually, degrade programming skills, right? So you get dumber using it, which is kind of non-intuitive. Hopefully, Thorsten, you haven't suffered any brain damage so far with your your vibe coding. Thorsten touched on some of these, why you still need developers. There's architecture and design, that's all that markdown files that Thorsten was doing. There's, how are you going to go about it? What tools you want to use? Are you going to do it in C# or Python, or, what platform are you running it on? There's a lot of things that need to happen in order to build a good solution. Code review as well. Expert developers need to be looking at this stuff. You can use other AI to review the AI, but I think at some point, you kind of lose that economy of scale when you have AI looking over AI's shoulder. Complex stuff, you're going to need people for that. And then, the human elements. I think we'll send this slide deck out for anyone that attended, so you don't have to write it down or anything. Best practices, right? Use AI as a co-pilot, not as an autopilot. I think that's the main thing, the main point. And, reviewing that generated code, which we've emphasized multiple times. If you're a development shop, invest in developer education, and also give them a token budget, right? They need tokens in order to be better at their job. Code standards. What I've seen also with markdown files is you're actually describing what kind of code standards you want to have. And then, AI is really like a first draft, not a final product. I've seen a lot of companies, a lot of developers, they'll do that first MVP in a vibe coding session. But then if you're going to deploy it to enterprise, you're going to deploy it to the web, there's considerations like, is it scalable, right? Is it enterprise ready? Can it support, 10,000 users at a time? There's a lot of things that go into development from that standpoint. And then, future model, right? So, developers become more productive. They're not going to be replaced, right? And, the AI is going to handle the how, but the humans are going to handle the what and the why. So with that said, shameless plug for my podcast. Hopefully we'll have Thorsten on here in the next few weeks. There's 120 episodes out there. Just had Amazon on there. I had a really interesting one that just dropped this week, applied brain research, which is using AI, a lot of edge AI and AI topics coming out of CES that I was at in January. So give it a watch. If you're into podcasts, it's available on all your favorite channels. It is also video first. So, there's a YouTube channel, but you can get it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, etc. All right, Q&A. Let's see if we have some questions. I think we do have 4 questions. they're not so upvoted, but we'll just go down the list. First one, have you seen any cases where vibe coding accelerated MVPs but slowed down scaling later? Is that something maybe that you've seen?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
The UI looked great. The process flow through that UI was fantastic. The code underneath it was horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And had security holes all over the place. And basically, all we were able to leverage was the basis, the UI, and understanding the code flow. But everything had the front end, the back end, everything had to be rewritten because somebody just went in unprepared and just started typing. That's
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I have definitely seen that. And again, imagine somebody's now spent $10,000 worth of tokens, and then you need to spend another $100,000 to fix it, right?
Yeah.
That's probably not a good thing. That's not a good thing.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, if you got the proof out of it, you're getting, for 10K, you figure out whether someone actually wants it and would use it, and it's on point. But then you have to understand that you're going to have to then back up and write a more enterprise quality application, right?
Yep.
All right. How do you maintain architectural consistency when code is generated across multiple sessions or tools? Yeah, good question. And we saw that with Gen AI and trying to keep like the same images like in a book. It was practically impossible before. I think they've gotten better at that now. But how have you seen that with code gen?
That goes back to the creation of a markdown document to track the progress and
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that any informational changes and architectural changes and any architectural decisions are tracked in a separate markdown document so that it's not the session that's now tracking what you've said, but it's now a markdown document or a separate document that you can transfer across sessions that you're now leveraging.
So you're iterating but capturing in the markdown so that it remembers where you're at and it's not starting over at a tabula rasa, a clean slate every time, a memento, like, I
Yep.
don't know what I'm doing here. Yeah.
Yep. That's right. That's right.
All right. Good question. How are companies handling IP ownership and licensing risks with generated code? Another good question. A lot of people are afraid of putting code into these LLMs. And I think best practice there is essentially the free version is the one that's going to take everything, right? And the paid version is the one that gives you the sandbox. Is that correct? Thorsten, is
Depends
that in
on
your
the paid
experience?
version. It depends
Okay.
on the paid version, but yeah,
Mhm.
obviously, look to see if that you have a private LLM. Yeah, if you're just going to be using, and so let me be very clear, if you're using Copilot, like I told you in the beginning, is on your personal account, then you are basically sharing your code with the world. If you're using in this particular case a corporate Azure
Copilot.
corporate Copilot session that's private to your enterprise, then
Mhm.
that's all that isn't shared with anyone, and that training data isn't leaked. So and so
Yeah.
yes, it's important just like you don't publish your code, you know, on
Blog.
something public, right? That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Just posted it to Reddit, whatever,
That's right. Post it to Reddit, and yeah, your IP's gone.
or GitHub or whatever. Yeah. Yeah. This is what's keeping the IT team up at night. Our CSO and CTO are like, but no, you need to educate your workforce about what's public and what's not, and what to use and what's not. So that's a good question. If you had to build a production grade product process of junior developers growing into middle senior engineers. Oh, wait. Sorry, it jumped on me. If you had to build well, okay, I picked a different one when I clicked. It got me there. Oh, now it went away. Okay, if you had to build a production grade product today, what percentage of the code base would you realistically trust to vibe coding? There we go. Got it out.
98%,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
right? But basically, by the way, I don't actually expect that I'm writing much of the code. I'm double checking to see whether the AI is doing its job properly. But again, remember everybody, I can read code and I understand and I've taken a lot of steps in order to do the preparation. That's the critical part to all of this. If you don't have the same skills, you don't have the skills, that same skills, then it goes down. And then, by the way, then the transfer of bringing the MVP and some of the PRDs into the right level of code goes to Chris's team, right? It goes to Softeq, right? So um, I'm going to go back to the beginning: crap in, crap out, right? That's the thing that's there. And if you don't understand that you're feeding it bad information, then you're going to get bad code out, right?
Yeah.
So that's
I
why you
think a lot
still
of
need an
organizations
architect.
are saying about 30 to 40% or more of the code is being written by AI now, which I guess is what, even like what Jensen is saying, is like if 50% of it, that their salary is on tokens, that means they're leveraging, say roughly, say 50% of their
Yep.
time on code generation. And maybe vibe, and for what you're saying, vibe coding maybe is, I always think vibe coding is a little more casual than maybe production coding. So, I mean, it's, even if you're using the AI, right? But I guess it's maybe used more broadly than that. But yeah, I mean, that's where we're getting to, is that you're not, my analogy on that again is, it used to be you had to flip switches in order to put input code into a computer. And then you had to know assembly language in order to code a computer. You had to understand the CPU and the instruction set of the CPU in order to write a program. And then you had higher level languages like BASIC and Fortran and C and C Sharp. And we kept getting levels of abstraction. AI now is at a level above, say, object-oriented programming, but you're still a developer.
Yep.
So,
absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. With the popularity of vibe coding, how do you see the process of junior developers growing into middle and senior engineers?
Oh boy! Shout out to Elizaveta. Actually,
Yeah.
miss you.
Yeah.
I know. AI can take a lot of different roles. But we still need a basic human understanding of what's happening, right? Even in all sorts of different, you still need a person in the middle that basically knows what's happening. And fortunately for us, in a lot of cases, I'm not going to say in all cases, but a majority of graduates and junior developers come out with a really, really good human understanding of the way that code should work, best practices, business requirements, and human interaction. And that is not something that can be taken by AI yet. And so the one thing that does actually keep me up at night is companies that are now going to that aren't hiring junior developers because they don't think they're needed. Right? That's not the right thing. Is we need to continue to nurture junior developers. We need to instill, if I'm a security company, I hire a junior developer, and I need to instill my company knowledge into this junior developer so that I always have a human interaction point with the AI, right? Because it's something
well,
that's
I'm
really
a big
important.
fan of interns, always have been. I was an intern myself back in the day at IBM when I was at, working on the shuttle program at IBM. But, I mean, that's in fact, I think we have quite a few interns coming in at Softeq over the summer, both in our, Lithuanian office and Houston. But anyway, no, I'm 100%. Hopefully companies aren't doing that, because you need the fresh, developers coming in who probably also are much more comfortable vibe coding than the old dogs like, you and me.
Yep.
We did talk about the bloat concerns of the too many MD files. I'm going to just put that one as answered. That can be a concern. But Jonathan had another question. As someone who isn't fluent in code but understands enough of what is possible to guide AI to viable results, what would you recommend as safeguards to ensure AI isn't coding too much or too complex to achieve the result?
Great. By the way, really, really good question, and something I forgot to mention. So something that AI, again, is trying to please, right? And obviously it consumes tokens for everything that it generates. So something that I also quite often, when I'm getting into a tricky section that I'm having difficulty understanding where it's going, I also add one particular quote or one particular prompt. And I say, proceed in small steps, right? And explain exactly what you're doing in each step. Wait for me to say next before proceeding to the next step. Okay.
Mm.
And so that basically it'll tell me what step it's taking. And it'll make that step. It'll explain the step that it's actually just taken to me, right, in more detail than it typically does. But instead of now doing 10 or 15 steps at a time, it goes one step at a time. Then it waits, and it doesn't proceed to the next step until I say next. So that gives me the opportunity to query what it's done if I didn't understand exactly what it's done, if I didn't understand the code properly. And so I can now query it 3 or 4 times until I know, aha, that's exactly what it did in that step. Now move to the next step. I understand exactly what happened. Yes, I agree with it. Now move to the next step. And then I say next, and then it moves to the next step. So when it starts getting too complicated, as Jonathan was pointing out there, where I don't understand exactly what happens, I tell it to get more granular and to take smaller steps in what it's doing. And it's just a matter of prompting. And by the way, the side effect of that is that it's not taking $500 worth of token to generate, this response,
yeah.
right? Because all you really needed was the first 50 cents of the response to actually get it somewhere.
When do you actually decide to, say, for example, refactor? Like, hey, why don't you go back now that we're at this point, or you just don't worry about that until later, version 2 or whatever?
That really depends on the project. That depends on what I've done. That quite a lot. It's like, okay, we'll revisit this later. Just leave this out for now. But again, by the way, you do need very important. You need to make sure that it's logged in an MD file. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, great. Well, I know we're a little over time here. Really appreciate the conversation, Thorsten. Definitely a brave new world with AI and what's available to people, and coding. Hopefully this was interesting for those that attended. Thank you for attending the webinar. Feel free to reach out to us about anything you might need at Softeq. We're happy to talk to you about your project and whether we can help you or not. Yeah, go ahead and take the dive and do some vibe coding this weekend.
Absolutely. Be productive.
Be productive. Yeah, definitely a great time to be creative. And yeah, I mean, basically, you don't need to learn C#. You just need to know English nowadays. So it's really interesting to see how things have evolved from the paper punch tape days. All right, great. Well, that's it for me. I don't anything else you want to add, Thorsten?
No, Chris, thank you so much for having me. I'm glad that I was able to share. I hope that I added some information, some useful information to the people attending. And look forward to being on your podcast in the future.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to that as well. Yeah, thanks, Thorsten. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.